Catch up with me. All right. Kia ora everybody. Yesterday the National Party admitted that their tax plan doesn't stack up and that actually 99% of New Zealanders will not get the $250 a fortnight that the National Party have been suggesting on the campaign trail. I note that the National Party have also been saying that, oh well, it was all up front, just go and look at our calculator, a calculator that today they've had to correct and admit that that was itself misleading as well. I think New Zealanders deserve better from the National Party. I think New Zealanders know that National's numbers don't add up, and they know that if Christopher Luxon and the National Party win, that they will lose. They will lose because there will be thousands more children living in poverty, because there will be no action on climate change, because there will be cuts to things like free prescriptions, 20 hours free early childhood education for 2-year-olds, free and discounted public transport for young New Zealanders. And thousands of job losses before Christmas if there was a change of government. The Labour Party's put forward a positive plan for New Zealand's future, one that's about making sure we're bringing inflation back down, making sure that we're supporting New Zealanders through the cost of living crunch, keeping people in work whilst growing our economy. Our economy has turned the corner. We are seeing economic growth returning. In fact, we've got one of the highest growth rates in the OECD, according to the most recent quarterly figures. That will flow through to benefits for New Zealand households if we stay on course. Change of government would put that at risk. So my message to New Zealanders is very clear. Whilst it's natural to think about change at a difficult period, New Zealanders do need to think very carefully about change to what? Because if the National Party wins, they will lose. Happy to open up for questions.
The National Party's just put out a press release celebrating that 50,000 more people have gone and checked their tax calculator. Do you think that that is something to be celebrating if people are rushing to the tax calculator in light of what we've learned in the last 48 hours?
Well, the National Party's whole campaign is based on slogans and sound bites without substance. When New Zealanders actually look at what the National Party are proposing, they will quickly learn that they're most likely to end up worse off if National was to get elected. I think the National Party's calculator itself being dodgy is just really a reflection of their election campaign.
And just on the offshore wind that we've heard, policy promise that we've heard from National today, have you been slow off the mark to create offshore wind farm regulations?
We're already fast-tracking offshore wind work. I think the fact that the National Party seem to have discovered that offshore wind's a good idea is a welcome sign, but it's something the government's already doing.
But is there a danger in fast-tracking resource consents for offshore wind, do you think?
Look, fast-tracking doesn't mean that there's no consenting. There's still a consenting process. It's just you go through it faster.
How much do you think people actually care about this tax issue with National, or do you think that the desire for change will override these tax issues?
I think a lot of New Zealand families were under the impression that they were going to be getting potentially hundreds of dollars a fortnight if there was a change of government in the form of tax cuts. Their numbers don't add up, and I think New Zealanders are seeing it for the scam that it is.
And what do you think about that calculator stuff up?
Well, clearly it's not acceptable. It's just another example of the National Party trying to sell something using misleading and false information.
Have you had any talks with Te Pāti Māori about potential, after the election, potential relationships?
No, certainly not in the last 3 or 4 months. I mean, I've had infrequent but occasional conversations with them in the brief time that I have been Prime Minister, but it's more just been along the lines of, informal conversations.
Did you watch the debate last night?
No, unfortunately I didn't, sorry.
So, do you think maybe you should talk to Te Pāti Māori just in case they might not be on the same page as you?
I've said that, we'd certainly talk to Te Pāti Māori after the election, and we'd talk to the Green Party after the election.
8 days to the election, how crucial is the undecided voter for Labour?
Absolutely critical. We know that there's enough undecided voters out there to completely change the outcome of the election. And that's why we've got a very active ground campaign at the moment with a lot of door knocking, a lot of phoning, a lot of people being out and about on the streets to make sure that we turn out the vote, but that also that we persuade the currently undecided voters.
Is that wishful thinking though?
No, not at all.
Because trying to get 10%, which is kind of where the undecided voter is at the moment, trying to get all of that to come to Labour is a mammoth task?
We do know that opinion and sentiment can shift quite dramatically in the last few days of a campaign. So the polls that were out a couple of days before the last election, there was a 10-point variance, almost a 10-point variance between those and what happened on election day. So a lot can happen in a short space of time in the final closing stages of an election campaign.
Just over a week ago, you came out of the New South Leaders debate pretty fired up and talking about how much energy you were going to bring from there on, and obviously had a bit of a speed bump with getting COVID. And I guess how are you feeling now, getting out on the campaign again? How's your energy, and what's the plan for the next week?
I'm feeling great, but look, even while I was isolating, there was still a very energetic Labor campaign happening on the ground, and you saw that every day with our Labor team out there, pressing the flesh, making sure that we're getting our message across. We've seen, we've still seen quite a lot of momentum, even though I was, isolating. We've still seen a lot of momentum building behind the Labor campaign over the last week.
With your internal poll numbers sort of bouncing back a bit, do you reckon you've got that second wind in you?
I've always got a second wind in me, and I'm certainly looking forward to spending more time on the campaign trail in the next 8 days.
Windy fellow.
Was that?
Are you a windy fellow?
I'm not quite sure how to take that, Amelia. Maybe rephrase that question.
I'm causing mischief. None of the minor parties believes that National's tax plan adds up. What does that say?
Well, the National Party's tax plan doesn't add up. They'll be struggling to find any credible economist that thinks their tax plan stacks up. I think New Zealanders can see it for what it is. It's just a bunch of numbers plucked out of thin air and a scam that they can see as a very hollow one.
And another of your MPs has been out there talking about wanting a capital gains tax. Why does your own team keep thinking you've made the wrong call?
No, I don't agree with that characterisation. Rachel Boyack herself has actually said very clearly what it was that she was talking about. She was talking about the fact that we did campaign on a capital gains tax previously. The New Zealand public didn't support it, and we're not campaigning on it this time.
And do your MPs need to be clearer with their messaging? The Nats are clearly listening to absolutely every speech that anyone attached to Labor is doing, and you're just continuing to fuel the fire that is a wealth tax.
Well, I think what Rachel said was a statement of fact. We did campaign on it 2 elections in a row. New Zealanders didn't vote for it.
Have you been briefed on what's happening at Queenstown Airport? Is it concerned?
I'm expecting an update shortly, so I don't want to comment on it until I've actually got a full update on what's happening
The
there.
Nats wheeled out John Key this week. Why haven't you wheeled out Jacinda Ardern or Helen Clark?
I'm not going to reveal everything that we'll be doing in the next week or so, but there will certainly be a very active campaign, and you can expect to see a few familiar faces.
Is Jacinda Ardern going to be back with Labor this week?
I'm not revealing what we're doing in the last week of the campaign at this
Who
point.
would be more helpful, do you think, to your cause?
What's that?
Who do you think would be more helpful to your cause?
Well, you'll just have to wait and see.
The latest
You're
tax
already
plan-
in
If possible.
I'll come back to that. You're going to ask about.
The latest taxpayer career poll has Labor a small rise by 1.4. It still has Winston Peters with National Act in a governing position. Do you think there's going to be much movement of that ahead of election day?
Yeah, I think there will be significant movement. I think particularly now that New Zealanders are becoming increasingly aware that the National Party's tax plans are actually a scam and they're not going to benefit by anywhere near what the National Party have been saying they would benefit by.
You talked about having some things planned for the last week of the campaign, but with early voting already having started, at what point does it get too late to change the results?
What we're seeing is that early voting, whilst it's above where it was in 2017, it's certainly well below where it was in 2020. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that New Zealanders are holding back a little bit this year. There will be a lot more people deciding how to vote much closer to the day, probably a bigger turnout on the day rather than advanced voting. And so that means that this last 8 days of the campaign is going to be critical.
You've attacked the National Party tax policy from a lot of different angles. Do you hope that this latest criticism about that $250 a fortnight will be the one that really gets through to voters?
I think voters looking at the National Party's tax scam and seeing that they're not going to benefit by very much from it and they're going to pay a very high price for it, will actually be thinking again about whether or not a change of government is the right approach at the moment.
Just on that, how many instances of them either misspeaking or deliberately, sorry, not deliberately, but like actually saying the wrong thing about their promise have you found?
Well, I mean, if you just, I stood next to Christopher Luxon during the leaders' debate where he basically said that the average family would get $250 a fortnight under National. Now, there was no up to in that statement. I think the average family watching that would have thought that they were going to get $250 a fortnight if they elected him.
To be fair though, you're in a a glass house on this one though, right? You've got a very expensive tax plan of yourself, taking GST off fresh fruit and veggies. However, Health Advice says that it's unlikely that taking that GST off would make fruit and vegetables cheaper, and it's higher income families who are going to benefit more. So is that not a tax scam yourself if we're using that language?
No, absolutely not.
How not? If people aren't benefiting from it, and you can't guarantee that the cost savings is going to be passed on, how are you not in a glass house here?
We've indicated that we will be making sure that the cost savings passed on.
50,000 people, though, going to check that calculator. That says that they are interested in national policy.
I think that after the publicity that the National Party got yesterday, I think New Zealanders would want to check for themselves what's involved in the scam. And I think when they do look at the numbers and they do understand what the National Party are falsely trying to sell them, I think they will be more concerned.
Hipkins has put out another video reconfirming that it would in no way put Labor back into power. What's your reaction to that?
It's kind of irrelevant. We've made it very clear that we won't be working with Winston Peters.
Can I
This
just ask
is a bit of an attack ad, though, on you, isn't it?
Look, whatever Winston Peters does is up to him, but
It's not the best welcome back on the campaign trail, Vic.
well, look, it's kind of immaterial. I'm not going to be working with Winston Peters. Been there, done that, got the T-shirt, don't want to do it again.
The support for New Zealand First is rising. So why do you think that is, and what are you going to do to counter that?
People can form their own views on that. I mean, I think ultimately, Winston Peters is a force for chaos.
Are you too big or too senior a figure to go on the Stuff debate next week?
Not sure about the details of that.
You
one,
mean
sorry.
the finance one?
No, the minor parties that are joining in.
Minor
Why don't you join in?
Oh, there hasn't been a multi-party debate which also involves Labour and National leaders since 2002.
Why not join?
Because I think that New Zealanders, the debates that we've been focused on are the prime ministerial debates.
Yeah, but if you're scrapping for votes, surely that's how you get them.
No, I think, look, I'm happy to debate Christopher Luxon any time.
You don't want to debate Winston Peters?
What's that?
You don't want to debate Winston Peters?
I don't really see that there'd be any value in it.
If Christopher Luxon said he'd go to the multi-party debate, would you do it then too?
Of course, but I don't think that he would see value in it either. Ultimately, Christopher Luxon and I are the ones competing to be Prime Minister.
on Serapit, for Ash Verrill, do you have confidence in Serapit?
The comments made by Pharmac officials, including the Chief Executive, are unprofessional and inappropriate. That is a view that I have, that the board chair also shares, as does the Public Service Commission.
The question was, do you have confidence in it?
That is a matter for the board, who is the employer of the CE, but I have made my views to the board very clear that those are inappropriate comments and they need to make sure that they have an assurance that it will not happen again.
So you are unable to say that you have confidence in her?
The board needs to provide assurances that the CE is able, that the CE that those sorts of comments will not be made again.
Is she on your last warning?
Those employment matters are matters for the board, but my response to this is very clear that those are absolutely inappropriate comments.
Question for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, go for it.
So just a question for our Asian units. The dairy attack in New Windsor. Last year, obviously, the government provided a lot of support when there was an attack in Sandringham. Is there going to be similar support this time for that community?
There's always support available for a community that's been affected by a tragedy like this, and I do want to extend my sympathies to that community. At the moment, that matter sits with the police. The police are able to bring in additional support for a community in the event that that's warranted.
But last year, you visited as police minister. Jacinda Ardern visited. David Seymour made a point of it. There was a protest at Parliament. I mean, do you expect that there will be that similar sort of wraparound support this time?
What I don't want to do is turn it into an election campaign sort of photo opportunity. I just don't think that would be appropriate. But of course, I fully support the community and I acknowledge the tragedy that's happened there.
Would you visit them privately?
I certainly wouldn't rule that out. Obviously, my schedule is very full in the next 8 days, but certainly I be happy to visit privately, not as a campaign visit.
How does Labor plan to support flood and cyclone affected residents across New Zealand moving forward?
We've been really focused on building greater resilience to ensure that there are fewer people who are affected by floods and cyclones in the way that the too many New Zealanders were earlier in the year. It's actually one of the reasons why now is not the time to dial back our efforts to mitigate climate change, which the National Party are proposing to do. But in terms of the work that we're doing around future resilience building and so on, I've got the person who's coordinating that standing right next to me, so I might invite him to make a comment on that.
Yeah, one of the things we did in the budget was create One of the things we did in the budget was create the National Resilience Plan, and that's a $6 billion fund that we can use over the next few years to be able to make New Zealand more resilient, to focus on climate change adaptation along with the mitigation work that we're already doing. The first tranche of funding for that has gone to those regions. It's what's paying for our cost sharing for the buyout for Category 3 properties, and significant funding for stop banks and other flood protection measures. So we do have a funding pool available for that. I don't think New Zealand's done enough on adaptation in the past, and it is going to be a big challenge into the future. But it's not one or the other. And one of the things I was hearing even last night in the debate was people trying to suggest that we need to do adaptation instead of climate change mitigation. That is wrong. We have to do both of those things.
What risk does that pose by saying only doing adaptation?
Well, mitigation, climate action is our responsibility to reduce emissions, and I'm really proud that over the last 3 years we've seen emissions coming down. But the National Party has decided that they're going to take all of the funding we have for that and put it into tax cuts rather than into supporting reducing transport emissions or industrial heat emissions. That would be the wrong thing to do, be selling future generations short and selling our economic brand short, because we trade off the fact that we are taking those kinds of actions.
Just on finance, can the country afford to maintain the super age?
Yes, absolutely. The choice about the age of superannuation, in my opinion, is a moral choice. It's a choice about dignity in retirement for the greatest possible number of New Zealanders. We can afford it if we prioritise it. Again, the National Party is not prioritising it by lifting the age.
I was just going to ask what you made of Winston Peters' comments last night that climate change has been happening for a million years.
I did have a joke that I was going to use them, but I'm not going to use it. Climate change is the rate of climate change is increasing significantly because of what humankind is doing. That's been proven time and time again by scientists around the world. Our job now is to reduce emissions and to support people with adaptation. Having a debate about whether it's millions of years or thousands of years is completely irrelevant to the action we need to take.
I think the real question here is exactly what the National Party proposed to do about climate change, because they've said that they're committed to net zero by 2050, and yet they want to dial back everything that we are doing now to get us towards that goal. A National Act New Zealand First government would be disastrous for the climate. It would put climate action well and truly on the back burner, and it would mean that we're not doing the things we need to do to get our emissions back down.
Great segue back to the offshore wind policy today then. If you say that you're already doing the fast tracking for offshore wind, I'm going to put the 5 key promises to you. Fast track permits for offshore wind so feasibility studies can get underway. Are you doing that?
No problem with that.
But are you doing it?
I'm happy to get you the detail on what we're doing.
What about complete the development of offshore wind regulations within 1 year to unleash investment?
We've certainly commissioned work on that, so I'll find out what the timetable is on that.
And require decisions on resource consents for offshore wind generation within 2 years of an application.
Well, part of fast-track consenting is that you do want to get speedy decisions.
And require consents for new transmission lines to be issued within 1 year and eliminate consents for upgrades to existing transmission lines within limits.
You've got a challenge there. I mean, you've got transmission lines that run over the top of people's houses. To say that you're not going to give those people a say in decisions around them, I think, would be a bit challenging.
And work with Crown Research Institutes to publish weather and geology data to accelerate investment in offshore wind.
Well, they do that already.
Just to be really, but Amelia, just to be really clear, we currently have a partnership between Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners and the New Zealand Super Fund to develop a huge offshore wind farm off Taranaki. This work is already happening. It's great that the National Party's catching up with it, but it's already underway.
But if on those points I've just put, those promises I've put to you, you said you're open to it rather than you're doing it. It's actually...
The actual project's happening. That's the point.
Yeah.
What do you make of...
Ben, you can have the last question,
What do you
Ben.
make of Rishi Sunak nicking your smoke-free policy?
Oh, imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. I think it's great. I mean, ultimately the world will be a better place if a lot fewer people are smoking.
Can I just jump in with one last question? Just comparing this campaign to previous ones you've been involved in, has there been more negativity between specifically Labour and National, or do you think this is a positive?
Well, I think the National Party is certainly talking up negativity, but I think if you look at the analysis about which party's actually been more negative and which party's been more positive, it's pretty clear 95% of the National Party's social media content is negative. Labour, I think it's more like a 60-40 balance in favour of positive promotion of what we're doing. So while the National Party accuse everyone else of being negative, I think they need to go and find themselves a nice big full-length mirror.
But that very same research that you're quoting says it's in the nature for them to be negative because they're in the opposition, right?
Well,
Accept that.
ultimately, it's a contest between two potential governing blocks of parties. In an election campaign, we're all equal. Right. Thanks, everyone.